Hello again, everyone. This video is about the impacts of microaggressions and how it affects the LGBTQIA plus community. Some kinds of anti-LGBTQ plus attitudes and policies are easy to spot. When we hear someone use an LGBTQ plus identity term as a slur, make an insulting comment, or dismiss a person's identity outright, we can identify what is happening and respond appropriately. When official rules and policies are biased against LGBTQ plus people or are designed as if we don't exist, we can work for better policies. But it can be harder to see or name how some common attitudes, practices, or everyday interactions are rooted in anti-LGBTQ plus ideas and often deeply hurtful to the community. These attitudes can be widespread and can even be held by people who see themselves as pro-LGBTQ plus, as allies, or as embracing and supporting everyone. The term microaggressions was coined in the 1960s by Chester Pierce and later cited and explained by others, such as Dr. Gerald Wing Su and Kevin Nadal, as a way to talk about the more subtle or micro ways that people show their biases and assumptions about others. It uses the word aggression to indicate that these biases are not neutral or simple ignorance and often cause a real harm by insulting or belittling people with marginalized identities. The original use of the term is in reference to racial microaggressions. In more recent years, thinkers have described the ways in which microaggressions play out against many historically marginalized communities. Microaggressions are defined as the everyday, subtle, intentional, and oftentimes unintentional interactions or behaviors that communicate some sort of bias towards historically marginalized groups. Microaggressions often appear to be compliment or a joke, but contain a hidden insult about a group or people. Anti-LGBTQ plus microaggressions often are rooted in heterocentric and ciscentric beliefs that being heterosexual and cisgender is natural or normal, while LGBTQ plus people are at best special or interesting, or in a more sinister vein, deviant or threatening. A person may hold these ideas consciously, carry these assumptions subconsciously, or a combination of both. Microaggressions are ways that this type of bias plays out in small, everyday interactions. Microaggressions are often seen as everyday, minor, or unexceptional. But many people report these interactions as genuinely damaging to their dignity and safety, and studies have repeatedly shown the traumatic cumulative impact of microaggressions on marginalized people. Encountering a steady stream of microaggressions is associated with psychological impacts such as depression, anxiety, and anger, as well as with physio impacts such as headaches, loss of sleep, increased blood pressure. These impacts are worsened when people are pressured to laugh it off, ignore them, or are dismissed as overly sensitive. One helpful metaphor is to imagine mosquito bites. A single mosquito bite is irritating, but not serious. 10 or 20 mosquito bites would disrupt our day or our enjoyment of an activity, and 100 or more bites would be intolerable. Many historically marginalized people are encountering a steady daily stream of other people's biases. Showing up as an ally means being aware of the concept of microaggressions. If someone shares with you that they have experienced a microaggression, or if you witness one of the most important ways to respond is to acknowledge and validate that person's experience without pressuring them to minimize or explain away what happened. You can listen compassionately, allow for their full range of reactions and emotions, and find out if there are ways that you can intervene. Showing up as an ally does not mean needing to be perfect. It does mean being able to listen and learn when we make mistakes. If someone shares with you that something that you have said or done was hurtful or was a microaggression, you can begin by thanking them for sharing that with you. You can listen to better understand how your words or actions impacted them and find out if there are actions that you can take to repair the relationship. Ultimately, receiving this kind of feedback is a gift and is an opportunity to learn and deepen your relationship. A few examples of microaggressions and their impacts. Type 1. Dismissing LGBTQ plus identities as less real. Referring to identity as a phase. Singling out transgender or non-binary people as identifying as their genders while saying that cisgender people are their genders. Refusing or forgetting to use someone's pronouns. Inquiring about a trans person's former name, especially with the implication that the former name is someone's real name. These send the message that LGBTQ plus people are to be seen as less than, not worthy of dignity, and not taken seriously. Type 2. Treating cisgender and straight identities as normal. Assuming people are cisgender and straight unless they come out. Assuming the genders that people are or want to be partnered with, and programming or events that assume straightness. These send the message that LGBTQ plus people are unusual. Denies LGBTQ plus people, particularly the youth, the ability to encounter themselves in a vision of the world. Type 3. Treating LGBTQ plus identities as deviant, sexualized, or adult in nature. Objecting to discussing LGBTQ plus identities or people in school or youth settings. Asking teachers or youth professionals to be less out at work. This sends a message that there is something wrong or inappropriate about LGBTQ plus identities or people. It denies the youth a full experience of diversity in the world, denies them vibrant and positive visions of possible futures, denies them language, role models, and impacts their well-being and their safety. Type 4. Treating trans people's bodies as objects of curiosity, seeking intimate information about trans people's bodies, especially when paired with assumptions about what kind of bodies make a transition real or complete. Have you had, will you have the surgery? Is your transition complete? Comments on a trans person's appearance, particularly when asking whether they look or sound like their gender. Questions about a person's body, sex life, etc. These questions are deeply invasive and tend to be considered off limits when asked of a cisgender person. Asking them of a trans person conveys that a trans person is less deserving of privacy and dignity, Additionally, there is no one way to be trans, and the implication that transition is only complete if a person has had medical procedures is inaccurate and hurtful. Even if straight or cis people are asking seemingly innocent questions out of genuine curiosity, these questions assume that queer folk ought to give answers and explanations about very personal and private matters such as our gender and our sexual identities. Type 5. Exoticizing or tokenizing LGBTQ plus people. Can you speak on panel, share the LGBTQ perspective? You must have an interesting story. Asking questions like, how do you know? How did you know? What was it like to come out? When there is not a relationship to frame these questions. Asking LGBTQ plus people to shoulder equity, belonging at work, particularly when this work is not compensated and or not part of the person's professional role. Soliciting LGBTQ plus participation solely to boost diversity without learning what would make such participation desirable. These kinds of questions assume that LGBTQ plus lives and stories are there for the consumption of non-LGBTQ plus audiences. While some of these questions are things that many of us would discuss among close friends, when these questions are asked without that relationship and without mutual vulnerability and trust, they become harmful. LGBTQ plus people are also often asked to do a disproportionate amount of educating, equity work, etc. While this work may be empowering for some LGBTQ plus people, it should always be compensated, and individuals should not be asked to take on this work solely because of the identities that they hold. Now, side note, with that said, a lot of us do go on panels, and a lot of us do open up and talk at work or other social gatherings and try to help people understand. And we do that because a lot of us have already had those experiences, and those experiences don't really get to us anymore. I can't say that they don't get to us because some situations do. But me, for example, and really I can only talk about myself, even though I am part of the community. It doesn't bother me to go on a panel or step up at work and say something or defend somebody or out myself in order to protect somebody else. It doesn't offend me when people ask me to discuss certain topics, certain surgeries, hormones, pronouns, all that stuff, like I'm personally willing to do. But at the same time, I can only speak for myself because even though most of our journeys do kind of follow the same path, it leads us to where we want to be, where we need to be. But where I need to be with my transition is not the same place that somebody else needs to be. There's many people that do not need hormones or surgeries in order to call their transition complete. There are some people that will never see their transition as complete because we continue to grow daily. So when asking somebody to step up on a panel or to talk at a work meeting or a school function or a community center or something like that, it's important to understand that not everybody will be willing to do this, but many of us are. And type 6. Dismissing the experiences and history of marginalization of LGBTQ plus people. I don't care what you do in bed. I don't care if you identify as a man, a woman, or a table. I don't care which bathroom you use, just wash your hands. We have moved past anti-LGBT discrimination. It seems like everything is focused on the LGBTQ plus community these days. The left has gone too far. Statements like these actually actively erases LGBTQ plus identities and the very real struggles for basic rights, access to safety and services, and dramatic medical, economic, and other disparities impacting the LGBTQ plus community. Type 7. Minimizing or dismissing bias or harm reported by LGBTQ plus people. I'm sure they didn't mean whatever insult that way. You must have misunderstood. Stop being so sensitive, aggressive, etc. Statements such as these compound the hurt caused by the initial incident, and they damage the trust. Anti-LGBTQ plus bias pops out in so many everyday interactions. These individual moments have a real and negative impact. We can avoid, minimize, and interrupt microaggressions and build kind, supportive, and affirming communities. Non-LGBTQ plus allies should educate themselves about the common experiences of LGBTQ plus people by reading, watching, listening to, and consuming media, and by featuring LGBTQ people. Allies can learn more about the LGBTQ plus community without putting individuals on the spot or asking invasive personal questions. Non-LGBTQ plus allies should expand authentic and mutual relationships with LGBTQ plus people, encounter the wide diversity within the LGBTQ plus community, and get to know LGBTQ plus people both through and beyond our genders and our sexual orientations. People of all identities should pause and think about how to question or statement might be received. If you are worried that your words might be hurtful, don't say it. By strategically challenging the message about LGBTQ plus that contribute to these biases, we can help build affirming communities. Have a great day, everybody.